Enter if you dare this ghastly conversation of teens fraught with despair and recent lacerations. Final girl, chase after her, don't let her get away. But first, the Slumber Podcast Massacre with TNA.
Welcome to Slumber Podcast Massacre with TNA. That's Tim.
That's Andy.
And this is a podcast about horror. Every week, Tim and I get together and we talk about a different film from the horror genre, from your well-known classics down to that rare gem cutting its face off at the back of your video store shelf. This week, Tim and I are going to talk about the 2013 remake / boot, I don't know, of Evil Dead. Not the Evil Dead, Evil Dead. Tim, do you got any hanging out with your friends in an isolated horror stories?
Ooh, hanging out with my friends in an isolated horror story.
Or I guess hanging out isolated with your friends.
Yeah.
Horror stories. The horror story itself doesn't have to be isolated, but
Right. Let's see here. Let me think about that one. I know that I've been in some situations that have been challenging. The one thing that comes to mind, especially with the all the snowfall that we've had recently, is that one year, I believe it was the winter going into 1999, and there was a big blizzard in Chicago.
yeah.
And for that New Year's Eve, a group of friends, I want to say there were 13 of us, perfect number, 13 of us in a one-bedroom apartment in Chicago. And it was, I don't remember what neighborhood it was. It was right downtown off of a side street, not any major street or anything. And 13 of us, one bedroom, one bathroom apartment. And we knew that it was going to snow, but we were like, it'll be fine. And so we get there, and for the age that we were and the people that we were, it was a really interesting party. Lots of things happening at that party. And and the thing was that we were having so much fun that somehow the fun just rolled into the next day.
Sure.
And we were all still there and awake, and we just decided to keep things going. And it was that day that the snow was supposed to be especially bad. And so we just kept having fun and doing our thing. The snow was falling outside. We were completely oblivious to it. And by the time the snowfall stopped, we realized that because we were on a side street, completely trapped there, because
right.
they do not, Chicago's worried about plowing major, arteries from one state to the other. They're not worried about little neighborhood side streets. So we were literally snowed in, snow to the top of the car, 13 of us, one bedroom apartment for 3 days.
Wow.
And we would have to take turns like walking, hip deep through the snow to the gas station to pick up more food and bring it back for the tribe, because things got like kind of tribal and crazy. And thankfully we just had
split off into factions inside.
Yeah, right. And the thing was, it was beautiful. By the third day, the girlfriend of the couple that owned the apartment was just like, I kind of caught her talking to her boyfriend away from everybody else. And she's like, I don't care what you have to do. I don't care what it takes. These people are going home today. And so we were all out there, and it literally was the whole neighborhood. It had to go and shovel itself. We had to shovel the whole street just to be able to move. And, but I'm telling you, I mean, there's so many more details I'd love to tell you about that weekend, but I'll keep some of those private.
I remember that weekend. I mean, I wasn't at that instance. I had my own. I was in my own apartment. My roommate had left first. Accidentally, I had left a window open because I kind of like having a window open when it's a little chilly out. Or I did when I was younger. Fuck it now. But I'm cold constantly now. But our power had gone out. So I woke up to a freezing apartment. So then I was like, well, it's just me. So I got extremely stoned. And as soon as that happened, I got a call, and it's my dad. And he's like, hey, I'm outside. Come over to the house. I was like, okay. So I had to like maintain in front of my parents for a while there. That was fun. But yeah, I remember that snowstorm. And then I was like, so we're off work, right? My dad's like, I can drive there. I'll get you there. I was like, God damn it. So yeah. Well,
Yeah, I remember the one one funny memory from that weekend in that blizzard was there's one Schwarzenegger movie, and I'm trying to remember which one it is. It might be, what's the future? It might be Total Recall.
okay.
Maybe
He goes to Mars.
Maybe it's Predator. I can't remember which one it is. But
What I'll know. Tell me what happens in it.
there's a scene where he's running away from somebody on like a like.
Is he in a jungle?
No.
Okay, then it's Total Recall.
Okay. But he's wearing kind of like, I mean, most clothes on Schwarzenegger are, tight fitting, but he's got on these like tan pants. And I was at least at that time, way more familiar with the movie. And so we're all kind of sitting around, of certain states of mind and watching this movie. And I remembered that it's one of the rare times that you see Schwarzenegger do like a full on run, like an all out run.
Oh, yeah.
And so I just timed it perfectly. And I just right before it happens, I just go, ladies and gentlemen, the sprint. And then you just see this giant, like hulking man running, like sprinting. And it looks kind of ridiculous, but it was just a cacophony of laughter through that place because it's just kind of bizarre to see that.
Yeah. Well, and I'm guessing probably in that scene, he probably had like a towel wrapped around his head. He probably looked goofy too because he was blocking the tracker that was inside his brain.
I didn't know you were such a huge Schwarzenegger fan.
Well, I mean, I was a man growing up in the 80s. So
Well,
that's
that's
hard
true.
to not be for a while.
Maybe if I just didn't watch Commando over and over
Right.
and over again.
I used to
could've got
know
this-
Commando way more, but yeah, I'm more of a sci-fi, less of a war guy. Unless it's a
okay.
sci-fi war, I'm all for that. But
Yes.
like,
Space lasers.
Got three boobed woman on Mars versus a Commando. I'm going for the three boobed woman on Mars.
Most would.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
anyway, Tim, let's stop talking about those fun Arnold Schwarzenegger movies because we're here this week to talk about Evil Dead, written by Fede Álvarez and Rodo Segues. Do you know how to say that?
I was concentrating more on the Fede.
Okay. Me too, because it's also directed by
Yes.
Fede Álvarez. So that's the more important part. This stars Jane Levy as Mia and Shiloh Fernandez as David. It had a budget of 17 million. Box office, this might be the biggest movie we've done so far. 97.5 million at the box office, which I was shocked because no one has talked about this movie since it came out.
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, that qualifies it for a certified hit. I mean, especially compared, like you said, to what we usually cover. But it had an awesome, terrifying ad campaign. Like I was telling you about earlier, like they had complaints from people that would be online and all of a sudden like they'd get a little, advertisement in their middle of their, Spotify or whatever. And it was just, it was something like it was the ad was saying like, don't skip this ad or something like that. And then it cut to Jane Levy just doing the don't do it, like really fast.
Yeah.
And it was literally freaking people out so bad because I think it would maybe even start with that. So people were like calling in and complaining, like, take this fucking ad off of my system. Like, I don't want to see this. It's scaring the shit out of me. So real strong marketing and online marketing campaign for that one.
Wow. All right. Well,
And you've got on the other side of it, you've got a whole gaggle, myself included, of people that were like, okay, like kind of hands on the hips,
right,
strolling into the movie theater, like, okay, let's see what these guys are doing here. Like, this is my baby. This is Evil Dead. You don't fuck with this franchise. Let's see what these jerks are up to. And then it turned out that at least some of us were thrilled.
So you saw this in theaters?
Oh, fuck yeah.
Okay, because you're a huge Evil Dead guy.
Yes,
I like the Evil Dead. But I've seen the first one once. It's really Evil Dead 2 is what it's all about. I mean,
that's my favorite too.
Yeah, that's like the nice refined, because that one,
balance.
Yeah, that one is also like, this is kind of the second remake of the Evil Dead.
Well,
because Evil Dead 2 is kind of a remake / sequel, right? Because they just kind of took the best parts of it and carried that over. They changed some stuff from the first one though, but it still has the same characters.
Yeah.
Am I remembering that right?
Well, yeah, but it's actually even further back than that. The very first movie that they did
right.
was, oh my God, somebody's going to kill me for not remembering the title. It's something in the woods. Not Cabin in the Woods. It's, oh, fuck me.
Terror.
Okay, I can't think of it right now, but it was the first thing that they did. And then when they got more money from that, then they made The Evil Dead. And then when they got more money from that, then they basically just keep remaking the same movie as they get more and more money.
Yes.
That movie. Yeah, because it's going to kill me if I don't know that. Yeah. It's
Within the Woods.
Yeah, Within the Woods. Thank you. Oh my God, I was never going to sleep tonight if I didn't know that. Within the Woods. So yeah, well, it gives us a good chance here. Let me just do like a 60-second background on these guys real quick, because it actually does play into this movie. A lot of times when someone does a remake, there's a lot of detachment from the original people who are making it. That is absolutely not the case with Evil Dead. These guys have their hands around this franchise in a death grip, and it's the same group from whether it's the TV show or the remakes or the musicals or whatever it is. There's always their presence is constant. So basically, you've got young guys who are friends from Michigan, and they're interested in making movies, and they're making these Super 8 films. And it was one particular scene that they were doing in one of their Super 8 films where it was kind of like a chase scene or like a tension scene. And while they were filming it, they had so much fun. They're like, well, why don't we try to make a horror movie? So what they did was they made kind of a teaser trailer, and they showed it to a local lawyer. And he's like, I don't really want to invest in it, but here's how you could. So they do enough things. They get these little screenings locally. They start gathering all the newspaper clippings that they can. And with every little bit of press that they can get, they take it to more and more people, all of their family members, all of whoever might have money in their town, the doctors, the lawyers, anyone. And they just keep trying to grab more and more money to move this project forward. So they make Within the Woods. It gets a little bit of local press, enough for them to not get all the money. They wanted $100,000 for The Evil Dead. They didn't get that, but they got pretty close. So that's when they went down to Tennessee and they filmed it. And we're talking true DIY style. Like, they are inventing things that they have to because they don't have the money, like the Vaso Glide, where they didn't have money for tracks. So they would take like a 1x8 and cover it in tin foil, and then cover that with Vaseline, and then put a little platform underneath, like a block of wood underneath the camera, so they can slide the camera across.
Innovative filmmaking, creative direction, innovative filmmaking here. Yeah. So it becomes iconic.
Absolutely. And yeah, so that's, you're right. What makes the evil, it's interesting. Like, Evil Dead weirdly gets lumped in with with slashers. I would say that that's a fair statement. It gets kind of lumped in with that, which is kind of interesting to me, because if you use like a restaurant analogy, like you've got McDonald's and Burger King and Taco Bell and White Castle, and then like you got Jimmy John's over here doing their thing. And it's still kind of fast food, still widely, advertised to the masses.
So fast, it's freaky, Tim.
Yeah, well, that's what they say. or Long John Silver's. I mean, any obscure, like slightly obscure, but still well-known food company, like that's the same vibe. Like, you've got your Fridays and your Nightmares and your Chainsaws and all that stuff, but Evil Dead really just kind of has their own little energy going on. And I think it's because, like I said earlier, that group of Sam Raimi, Ted Raimi, Rob Talpert, and Bruce Campbell all have stuck together. And if they're not as active in the crew or the actors of the film, they're at least producers and very much have a strong opinion and a strong voice about everything that gets done. In fact, and I'm sure we'll talk about this scene later, these movies are known, if for nothing else, for the tree raping scene. Mm-hmm. And there actually was a decision by this director he just didn't write that in. It was just something he felt like it wasn't needed. He didn't write it into this remake. And then rumor has it was Rob Talbert that said, he literally is quoted as saying, "Where's my raping tree?" Like when they had a production meeting, like looking around, like, "Where's my raping tree?"
Yeah.
So they found a kind of
It is one of the more shocking moments of that first.
Oh yeah.
One.
And it's something that Sam Raimi has had to wrestle with throughout his entire career. And he has apologized for it and said that it was a misjudgment on his part. But then again, he was 19.
Right.
I mean, he was 19 years old. So you can't, we've all grown up a lot since 19.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my point, is that these films have their own sort of tribe.
Yeah. This
family.
one doesn't seem as much as a rape as like the original one is like a molestation. This is just kind of a means of a possession. Yes.
You're right. And I think
there's a good way to play around it.
Exactly. Without just skirting it or running away from it. I think they made a nice, they just adapted for it to be not quite as exploitive and but still get the point across. But we'll talk more about that later, because that's a whole big
let me run Nan's sum down real quick, because we're already getting into bits and some of our listeners are just going to be confused. So here's Nan's sum for Evil Dead. David and his friends meet up at his parents' cabin to help his sister Mia get over her heroin addiction. Investigating a peculiar smell, the gang finds in the basement the remains of a demonic sacrifice, along with a peculiar book wrapped in skin. Ignoring the warnings to not read the book, one of the friends reads the book and unleashes a demonic force determined to destroy the 5 souls needed to facilitate the return of the abomination.
Yeah, skin wrapped.
Right. Yeah.
Wrapped in skin.
With this one looks way lamer than the original one. I was expecting
they weren't allowed to. They weren't allowed to use that original design.
Well, but you can still make a different design that's not this plain.
Yeah. Yeah.
I expected a little more design in the book. Yeah. I didn't want like the face in it. Like, but give me something else.
At least they changed the name of it. Like they changed the name of the book. Instead of going with the Necronomicon, they gave it that.
Because I learned recently that was written by H.P. Lovecraft. So
yes, yeah, not a demon,
not a demon.
But yeah. So that kind of brings up an interesting point about this movie in general, and about remakes in general. There's any number of reasons why a movie is remade. I wrote down a couple of them. You either build on a previous financial success. Maybe you think you can do it better. You have a creative team that thinks they can do something better. You introduce the movie to a new generation that might not be as familiar with the original. Or it's just maybe a love letter, a true love letter homage to the original. One of or a mix of those things. And for this, I think it's a few things. Because you have that same creative team involved. I don't think it was anybody thinking that they could do something necessarily better. I think it was probably more along the lines of the introducing it to a new generation. That would be my guess.
Yeah.
For why they would, and I think they knew that anything that has come out with Evil Dead has only really increased in popularity from the very beginning. It's never gone backward.
No.
And so there's no reason to believe that that a reboot or a remake would somehow be a failure. I mean, it's always maintained a high standing. Like, not only doesn't it go backwards, I can't think of anyone who's seen these who's been like, I didn't like those. Or in general, I don't like the Evil Dead series. Right. Because I get it if you don't like some of the specific movies like this one, that's understandable. But if someone said that to me, they'd be saying like this the second half of the sentence to my back. Like I'm already walking away from you, like as a person. Like, it's one thing if you say something like, I like Evil Dead, it's not my favorite in the horror genre. I'm cool with that, because I know it does have its own specific flavor. But for somebody to be like, I think those suck, I think that they're bad, they probably are missing some of the innate goofiness and fun of the
Right.
franchise.
Yeah.
And they probably don't have a great sense of humor.
I should clarify, people who like horror movies, there's never anyone who's like,
Yeah.
I just don't like Evil Dead. Because these movies are visceral and gory, and they are going to turn a lot of people off for sure.
No, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Cause that's part of one of my main attractions to these movies. The first one that I saw, and I'm with you 100,000% in that I believe Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, is the best one. I think it strikes the most perfect balance of refinement, but not being so overly refined that now it's just kind of making fun of itself. And
Which is Army of Darkness.
Yeah, nothing against Army. There are some people out there that live and die by Army of Darkness. They're usually a handful of years younger than us.
Yes.
And that's cool because
that is the like, because there are kids who love the Star Wars prequels, but people our age are like, those were garbage. But those are the ones they saw as kids, and that got them excited about it. So it's always nostalgia. It always comes. Nostalgia is gonna fucking cloud your judgment so hard.
It's true. But the what I liked about 2 is and it's a term that I've sort of coined, and I think I probably even used it on the show a couple times, is 2 is an experience movie is what I call it. Like when you watch this movie, and especially when you introduce it to people that haven't seen it before, I mean, they're going to have an experience when they see in Evil Dead 2 that black blood or whatever it is come blasting out and just cover Ash, and he's slipping and falling, or when the eyeball comes flying across the room and into the girl's mouth. People, it's like a roller coaster.
Yeah.
It's like an absolute, like, just viewed roller coaster. And so that's what makes it really exciting. And it's a really, really tall order to try and recreate that excitement. So the question that you have to ask yourself is, why remake anything? And before we go further, I have just something I got to throw out to you just because I think it's so interesting.
Sure.
People remake movies. People remake TV shows. People remake songs. Isn't it weird that nobody rewrites books? Nobody's like I'll fucking write the Great Gatsby. I'll show you the fucking Great Gatsby.
Right.
Like, and just, but nobody rewrites books. But you can if you want to, I suppose.
Sure. But no one's like, I just finished my novel, Great Expectations.
Yeah. Yeah, this time it's personal. But I don't know. There was just a thought that occurred to me.
No, that's interesting.
But speaking of the spirit of remakes, in my opinion, there's two ways you go about it. You either go about it to change it so drastically that it's completely putting your own spin on it, or you are trying to do like a note for note recreation of it. And like, I think that the best way to do it is a balance of the two, because I'll just give you an example. You know that I love 80s music. You know, I love The Cure, and they remade a Jimi Hendrix song, and I love Jimi Hendrix too. He had a song called Purple Haze. If you've heard of it.
I've heard of it.
And so they remake Purple Haze, and it's the song that they created is cool. It sounds cool, but it's so completely far removed from the original that there's nothing to sort of hang your hat on. And so it doesn't really work. And yet if they had done something like note for note, it's kind of like, well, then what are we even doing here?
Right.
I've
like
heard
Weezer when they did Toto. People went crazy for that. And I'm like, it's just Toto. Like,
right.
Or Africa. Yeah, that's what I meant.
I loved when he told me, when I was like, when that first came out, and I was like, yeah, I just love that chorus. And you're like, you realize that's like just one note? Like, it's like Morse code as a chorus.
That's right.
But yeah, so like you gotta ask yourself, like, how do you go about this in the right way? Now, I know from discussions earlier that I have a little bit different feelings about this remake than you do.
Yeah.
But I will say that what I felt was done right was exactly what I'm saying about that balance between picking some elements of the film to keep the same, or at least hint towards, and then take other elements and change them completely. And I feel like the elements that they changed were the right elements to change.
Wow.
Because here's my thing. If you sit me down and say, I want you to remake Evil Dead, the first thing I'm going to do is say, we are not making a character of Ash. To have any other person in the world play Ash is absolute suicide.
Sure.
Never do that. So if Bruce Campbell's not going to play Ash, no one should. So I do think that was, on a basic level, a great decision of theirs to not cast an Ash. That's a massive, great decision right off.
I agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah, because Bruce Campbell rules. You know why? It's like Jim Carrey is
genuine.
Yeah, Jim Carrey is great, and I like, and I know that he's more than just a clown, but I'm talking like the Jim Carrey that we all know, the silly, like, can't stop himself goofball.
Yeah.
Bruce Campbell isn't that, but he's also not a total straight man either. He's that nice balance in between.
Yeah. I follow him on Instagram, and the only things he puts up are just, he'll like say something, but then he puts like a funny Snapchat filter over it. Like, so, but he'll like do it within whatever the filter is. He's not like talking about serious stuff. He's just doing bits.
Right.
But it's never like, also, here's my car.
You're right. Well, good for him. That's good. That's how I want to see him. Yeah, he seems like a really down to earth guy. You actually were the one that gave me his biography as a birthday present, and it's a fascinating book called "If Chins Could Kill," and it's amazing. Like, he literally
monster chin.
What's that? Oh yeah,
monster chin.
And the book is so great because he literally, like, just, so to speak, opens up the books on the Evil Dead franchise and even gives you like their recipe for fake blood, like what they used and the ratios of it. Like he literally just kind of, it's like Cliff Notes for Evil Dead. Yeah. So it's really cool. But anyway, so you've got that good choice to not have an Ash, but yet you do keep the cabin. Now that's an excellent choice in my opinion, because if you would set it in a different setting, then I think you risk losing people. Great decision. Give up the Ash, but keep the cabin. Smart move. They've also got some musical, those little kind of plucky piano, like creepy, eerie piano trills that they do that are really similar to the original films. That creates a nice audio setting and familiarity. So you've got that. But the idea to bring the kids to the cabin for something other than getting high or drinking or banging is, I think it's probably a good choice.
See, that's one of the things I loved about this.
You just want to see him get high and bang.
Well, no, I was like, oh, that's clever. Okay, because I can already like see things unraveling about how someone would process like withdrawal from an addiction and the torment they'd be going through. But then as the movie is going on, I'm like, well, because our addict in the movie is Mia, and she's the one who's first possessed, and I would have much rather the person going through like the addiction is then having to deal with the demons around her instead of being the demon. So I was like, well, fuck, like missed opportunity there, I thought. Interesting. But I liked that going into it. I was like, oh, smart. Yes.
Okay.
So I started this on a high note. I came into this excited and I was very disappointed. Very disappointed.
Well, I'm going to talk you out of it by the end of this. Or you're gonna convince me the other way. Yeah. But no, it's I have to say that I'm shocked by that. I really thought that again, there's not only the balance of some major choices like I'm talking about, there's also some fun little nods. Like they make sure that they put Mia in a Michigan University or Michigan State sweatshirt.
Sure.
They make sure that they have a scene with her sitting on what's called the classic. It's actually the Delta 88 that Sam Raimi has in all of his movies, including the Spider-Man movies and everything else. That's like the car that he was driving. Okay. Yeah, the car that he was driving when they made the first one, and he just like keeps inserting that Delta. I think it's a 1973 Delta 88, and
Nice.
he has it in almost all of his movies, maybe all of them. But so there's these nice little hints and little like fun Easter egg style things.
They had a quick one where they just glance at a chainsaw real quick and then move to something else. I was like, good. But then she uses the chainsaw at the end. I was like, damn it.
Oh, yeah.
Which is it's a cool looking scene and it's fine. But I was like, well, then don't do the chainsaw nod earlier.
Right. Yeah.
Don't do a fake out with the chainsaw if you're going to use the chainsaw.
Right. Yeah. I see what you mean. You know what? I didn't even catch. Where did they show that glimpse of the chainsaw beforehand?
There's someone who's in the shed and they look for a weapon. And I'll be honest, I didn't keep a lot of detailed notes when I watched this movie. So I don't remember who was in there, but they just look at something briefly and they see it. And then it's on it for like a half second, but then the camera moves up and they grab something else.
It might be when David finds his dog. Maybe it's because he goes into the work shed. I don't know if anybody else goes into the woodshed otherwise.
Someone does,
but maybe. But yeah. So yeah,
it's probably Mia at some point. No, it couldn't be. Is it the blonde? I don't. Because I don't remember.
But yeah, either way, they do a nice. They make sure that they put in enough things to feed the fans, but not to just do out and out copies. Like they even managed to work in the what do you call it? Like the quick cut montage scene is what we'll call it, where they show like when Ash is building something and it's like the zoom in on the hand going into the chainsaw. Yeah, which is great. I mean, even Shaun of the Dead uses that a couple of times. So it's a nice little, like, everybody loves that. And I think, to tell you the truth, I think a lot of that stuff was born from like some of the action movies too. They used it like in the 80s, like when they would like be like gearing up for the big fight,
sure.
you know, cut to
Commando.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Good
yes.
Lord.
We have to do a Commando show now. But yeah, so but back to what you were saying about and trust me, I'm with you. Nobody loves naked, people, beautiful people running around at the risk of being killed more than I do. But I do think that they made a conscious choice to go with the addiction thing, because I think that I actually guessed this, and then I saw an interview with the director where he confirmed it. But it's the closest thing to a human metaphor for possession, unless you believe in that sort of thing.
Sure.
And
I totally thought that. And that's why I got so excited at the beginning. I'm like, oh, that's fucking, like, who doesn't say I'm wrestling with the demons inside of me, when they're dealing with the crippling addiction like that.
Yeah. And heroin is, it's not the easiest thing to kick in the world. It is, it's a very, very interesting drug, and it's, makes for a lot of hard times for a lot of people. And I've known some people that got into heroin heavily, and that nothing like aging somebody in their 20s and making them look like they're 97 years old in like a year than that drug. I mean, it's not good for you. But kind of going, I think it's okay now, just real quick, just to touch a little bit more on that tree scene. What I was going to say is that, Sam Raimi was under, this was even before the whole cancel culture thing was happening, but he's always been under fire for that tree scene in the first one. And he does admit that it was a little exploitive, that it was a little more harsh than he had planned for it to be. But I think that people are sort of taking it in stride, because I don't know if every musical's version does this, but our home theater did a version of the Evil Dead musical. And that scene is very much played up for laughs. And even to the point where Cheryl, who's being attacked by the trees, actually kind of very vaguely, but very definitively simulates some manual stimulation.
She jerks the tree off.
Yeah, she jerks the tree off. A couple at the same time, though. Two of them.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't know if every production does that.
Yeah, if you're that's the only way you can really go then with it. Yeah, and I mean, it's a musical. That one, that's a very different tone of that show. But I would say the musical more true to the tone of the Evil Dead than this movie is.
That's fair.
Because that is another one of my complaints. Is I think they stripped all the charm and humor, and what made the first ones engaging and fun to watch. It's fun to watch then when something's super gory, because now I'm laughing and now I'm like, oh God, that's disgusting. And now I'm laughing again. This is just like, did I watch this entire movie like with my teeth clenched? Yes, I did. But it wasn't because I was like dreading anticipation, or I don't know what emotion's coming next, or it's just like, oh God, more. Okay, yeah. Or you see something being set up and you're like, okay, I know what's coming here. Oh go, okay. If someone's like ripping their hand out from under a car and it's severing itself, you're like, ooh, gross. But at no point was I like, also, this part's like hilarious. Like this thing where this happens is so fun to watch. Like none of that's in this. And yeah, do I want Ash in this movie? Absolutely not. But would I have liked a character? Yes.
Well, that's an interesting point. And I think that that's something. Well, I think that's an incredibly strong point. I think that there's nothing wrong with inserting some form of comic relief, because usually even in a movie that's straight ahead, nothing but just lights out drama, there's usually a character who offers some sort of comedic relief. But this movie doesn't have any comedic relief at all.
No.
So that
it doesn't have characters. I know. I had to reread the synopsis to know the blonde is even David's girlfriend. I was like, oh, she was? Okay. Like, I know David and Mia are brother and sister. I know their mom has passed and David wasn't there for it, and that Mia has a addiction. That is all I know about 5 people.
Right. It's just, you make a strong point.
One of them looks like Jared Leto, and I hated him immediately only for that fact. And then I just hated him more as the movie went on because he's the idiot in the movie.
Yeah. And I don't know. I think his character is kind of interesting. He's sort of whiny, but he's not nerdy. He's not trendy. He's kind of but I know guys that look like that. Like, I know they're sort of like a little trendy, but that if it was the 80s, they would be nerds, but just because it's the 2000s, they lucked out and they're considered trendy.
Yeah.
Because
talking about me too.
Yeah, no, no, you're cooler than that. But yeah, no, I get what you're saying with the lack of definition, and I'll go with you on that. I'm not going to try to sugarcoat everything. It could have used a little bit stronger definition of character. Now, what you're saying about the comedy thing, and I know exactly what you like. Those, when you're on a roller coaster, we mentioned those earlier. When you're on a roller coaster, sometimes the most fun parts of it, and I know you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. You just did something gnarly, like corkscrews and then up and down and upside down. And then you do that like big, like rush up to a plateau. Mm-hmm. And then everybody's got that sort of giggle going on because they know that it's not over and something else is coming up. That is almost better than the gnarly thing that came before it or the gnarly thing that comes after it. Now, right. It can't exist without either one of those. But what you like is the up and down, the variation. The slap and tickle, the hardcore, and then the ease off, and then being shocked again. And I'm with you. That's a more fun ride than if you just had a roller coaster that was just a nonstop, like 2-mile long corkscrew. Like that's not as fun.
Well, like there's a ride at what's the one in Sandusky? Jesus, I'm blanking. Anyway,
Cedar Point.
Thank you.
Or Kings Island.
Yeah, Cedar Point. Cedar Point's what I'm thinking of. There's a ride there where it's literally like it blasts you off at like 90 miles an hour. You go up one hill, turn to where you just like crest the peak of it, and then come straight back down at these insane speeds. And that's it. That's the ride.
Yeah. And
that's fine because it's short and it doesn't have anything else to offer. This is that ride for if you had to ride it for like a half hour.
Yeah. And I'm with you on that. Like, I will give you that. I can respect that. And I will even agree with that.
And I'm not saying, let me say this. I'm not saying there's something wrong with a movie to be that, because there are movies that are like that I do enjoy. But if you're going to call yourself Evil Dead, I think that there are certain things that come along with that that make Evil Dead Evil Dead. If this movie were Evil Dead in the 80s or whatever, it wouldn't be as
No, you're
wouldn't
right.
have the remake of it later.
No, you're right. You're right. And I respect that. I do think, though, that if you're, and maybe this brings up a bigger topic, which is maybe it shouldn't have been remade in the first place. I mean, that's a valid consideration.
Yeah.
I do feel a little bit better about its very existence, knowing that the original creative team is still involved, so that I know that it wasn't just like snatched up by some fanboy that had money and said like, I want to make that because I think that's cool. Like kind of like how The Rock is doing with, and I love The Rock as much as the next guy, but like he was trying to do with remaking Big Trouble in Little China. Like, dude, I respect the fact that you love that movie. We all do. Don't remake it. Like, just don't do that. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Do you know I showed Nancy that movie, and 2/3 of the way through, she was like, this is a joke, right? You don't really like this movie.
Yeah, you told me that, and I died a little bit that day.
Yeah.
Like when you said that, I'm like,
Insane.
how can anyone, not just her, not just a girl, or I'm not going to split it down gender or anything. How can anybody feel that way about that movie? It's so fun, and everybody loves that movie. But yeah, but let me ask you this though. Like, I get it, and I'm with you. It is a better movie, and I think you made a phenomenally important point just 2 minutes ago when you said if this had been the flavor of the movie in the 80s, it would not have given birth to such a huge, arena that is the Evil Dead. It wouldn't have given life to that whole franchise. And I agree with you. However, if you're having to remake it, while there's a bunch of different ways you can go with it, I don't necessarily hate the idea of somebody saying, okay, we can't have Ash. We know that the other movies are known for their humor and only got progressively more known for their humor. What if we just did the Evil Dead and played it straight? What if we just went scary? The world has seen the Evil Dead funny, but what about showing them Evil Dead full on scary?
Yeah.
And is it as good of a choice or as good of a flavor as the other one? Probably not. But I do think that we talk about it all the time. Our loyal listeners will be thrilled to hear that here is finally a movie that has the pacing that we're talking about when we say when a movie just drops out and it loses its pacing and it gets boring and there's too much exposition. You've heard us say these things over and over. This movie, once it gets past a little bit of that clunky character introduction in the beginning, is just white knuckled through till the end. Yeah. It really is nonstop. It's almost amazing. It's almost a feat in and of itself that they're able to maintain that gradual upward climax at such a pace. It's awesome.
Right. I got some questions for you about this movie, and maybe these are, you have to know stuff from or be well versed in the originals. So the cabin they go to, they say it's their parents, right? They're like, mom would be disappointed as to what happened to the cabin. Like, it's obviously a place they've been before. Now the movie opens up with they kill a young girl because she is possessed, and there's the help of all these weird backwoods people, where at first you're like, oh, here are the demon people, but twist, they're really the good people helping to destroy this demon.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're at the cabin, and they're like, holy shit, there's a terrible smell, and they find this basement where the murder of the demon that we had just seen at the beginning took place. When is that supposed to have happened? Are the people, like, is that young girl and the dad, are they related to our main characters in some way? How did they end up in that cabin? Because it seems like the backwoods people knew what to do, or obviously knew how to deal with the problem, but did they not have a place of their own they could do it? They were like, we have to break into this cabin that I know has a cavernous maze-like basement under it. I guess not cavernous, but it is not your average storage cellar, right? No. They're like 3 rooms deep to where they get to where they've dealt with this demon. So was I missing something there, or was that just kind of an inconsistency that is just there?
No, it's a great question. I from what I can understand, I believe that we know that the kids haven't been there, that David and Maya or Mia haven't been there since they were kids. So that allows for a certain span of time. I believe what was happening is that sort of backwoods family that you're talking about, I think, was essentially squatting there, and that they were just sort of squatting in the cabin or using it as some sort of home base for dealing with whatever presence is out in the woods or something like that. What I thought was really interesting is that the kind of old sort of witch lady in that group that you're talking about, do you know what language she was
Stacey's
speaking?
a shaman. Let's not
Shaman.
disparage any witches out there.
There you go. Do you know what language she was speaking?
No, I don't.
Welsh.
Really?
Yeah, kind of interesting.
That is
interesting choice there. She's, and I think that they probably just did that because that actress, whose name is Sean Davis, and it's spelled Sian. It's pronounced Sean, not Sean, but Sean. She's Welsh. So maybe they were just like, well, you
we
know
need
Welsh.
someone who speaks Welsh. Yeah,
we need a crazy sounding language. Can you please just talk that way? But no, just in short answer, I think that they were either just squatting there or using it as a place to sort of deal with the issues.
Because they never show up again, which I was also kind of bummed about. Why have them in there?
Well, I'll tell you something. I do think that there is, while I'll agree with you that there's a little bit of disconnect between whatever happened to that family and where did they come from, I do think that it was a stroke of genius to open the movie with that scene. Because why? You've got guys like me, assholes like me, going in there, sitting in the movie theater saying, okay, let's see what you have done. You know, they massacred my boy. Like, let's see what you've done to the Evil Dead. And the first thing that they do with this movie is to do a non-canon scene from the Evil Dead. It's the scene isn't in any other Evil Dead movie.
Right.
So immediately they deflect all the judgment by people who are ready to sit down and judge it right from the get-go. And they give them something completely new and different. But yet it's still a kick-ass scene. It's a badass scene. I mean, it's pretty awesome and gnarly. But it kind of deflects all that judgment from people that are so quick to decide if they were going to love or hate this movie from the first frame. So I think it was a wise choice to do something separate from the other films, but I will agree with you that it does leave us wondering, like, so did these people just go back to their cabin,
right?
Or back, and why would the young girl get possessed in the first place? So no, you're right. There's a couple little holes there.
Because they seem to know what's going on, but then they're not very protective of. They're just like, well, leave that book behind, but wrap it in barbed wire and plastic. No one will get into it then.
I do like though.
They should have wrapped it like a CD was from like 2004.
Yeah, right.
You're never getting into that.
Just picking at that corner for like 15 minutes. It's a little strange. I like I like the fact that they started with something different, but it is a little disjointed. I'll give you that. But yeah, then they arrive at the cabin. Now, I do love the fact that they used a cabin that felt very similar to the other films. Like I said, I think that's a really strong choice. Another really strong choice that they make in this movie, this is kind of a fun thing, is the use of weapons. I know that you mentioned that you were a little disillusioned by their reuse of a chainsaw. I like that. I think it's kind of iconic. But yeah,
I said, I didn't have a problem with the chainsaw.
Oh, okay.
If you're going to like reference it and then go away from it, don't come back to it.
Okay.
Or don't have the reference in and use the chainsaw. That was my issue. I want to make my bitching very, very specific.
Yeah, no, we want you to, get your point out. And because, you got to, it's hard to hate a chainsaw in a horror movie.
Right.
In any horror movie. But they make good use of a nail gun. And, what I love about a nail gun is that in some sort of strange, funny way, it's even more mean and menacing than an actual gun. Like
Right.
somehow the idea of getting shot with a nail gun is worse than like getting blasted with, a 44 or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to do a lot with a nail gun to kill someone. Like, so it's just going to hurt. Now, I will say, at this point, I was already in super cynical mode, and I'm just like, it's not how nail guns work. You can't just do that. But I even recognized at that point, I was like, relax, guy, just fucking. So what they did with the nail gun was good, even though incorrect. It was good. I will say that. And it is. It's one of those moments where you're like, oh God, they got the nail gun. They're just going crazy and just got nails in her face. My favorite Pinhead of any movie we've watched, for sure.
Yes, yeah. The best Pinhead. Yeah, that's the best. That scene is the best Hellraiser sequel of any of them. Yes. Actually, for like 2 minutes inside Evil Dead. But no, right after the nail gun, we get really another just king of weaponry. And it's a crowbar. And you can't deny it's something's funny about the way that a crowbar is weighted and how sharp it is. When you pick up a crowbar, I don't care if you're a pacifist or a friggin' Viking, like you can feel the power and the potential in a crowbar.
As a pacifist, I can concur. Yes.
I mean, that feels like it's going to
do some damage, which is another thing. Like in this movie, people are abused so harshly with things, and then the human ones, not possessed ones, bounce back so easily. When she beats the fuck out of him with that crowbar, I'm like, he's done. You don't come back from that.
Right. No, good point. Good point.
That guy had like no scratches. There was a point where I was just like, this looks funny because it looks like a spoof of a movie where like the hot movie star has like nothing wrong with them and everyone else is caked in blood and scars and mutilation, and he's just like got the only blood on him is from other people.
Well, I'll agree with you. That seemed like, because when she comes down with that crowbar, he's putting his hand up in sort of a defensive, what would also ultimately be like a defensive injury. She mangles the fuck out of his hand.
Yeah.
And yet in subsequent scenes, he's building a homemade defibrillator.
Digs a grave.
Yeah. And digs a grave and does, So you're right. There's a little suspension of disbelief there with the recovery from some wounds. But I will say, you mentioned a little bit about blood and that sort of thing. What I really like, one of the things that I think is really neat in this movie is the use of color. And if you know anything about Evil Dead, what's kind of funny about the whole mythology of it is that it's really solved by the sun coming up. Like once the sun is up, like doesn't matter how bad things have gotten, everything's going to be fine. And so you can't have any bright elements at all while the action is going on, because it just sort of takes you, it creates some safety for the audience. So everything in this movie looks, and I see this in a really cool way. The coloring almost looks marbled in everything. It looks like when you look at marble and the way that marble colors move and undulate with each other. It's a mix of like browns and creams and yellows and like really cool muted blues.
Yes.
And
like
so I really like
steely blues kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love the color palette of this film. It's very cool. And
I agree. It looks really gorgeous. Like there are a lot of good shots of the woods. I thought, again, I was like, oh, are we back in Cascadia? But no, it's my second favorite place. New Zealand is where they filmed this. But it looks like the Pacific Northwest. But,
yeah, it does.
But yeah, just any shots of the woods are gorgeous. There's that shot at the end of the house on fire and it's raining blood. And that just like the orange and you've got these bright oranges and then blues surrounding it. They look amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So really, really pretty palette there. And the other couple things that they do, some certain aspects of this movie that they kept in is that you can't talk about Evil Dead without talking about, we mentioned it earlier, some of the zany camera effects that Sam Raimi invented with, like, you know, in some of the early films, or especially part 2, where Ash is flying through the woods and he's sort of facing the camera and spinning around and doing all these goofy things. So there has to be some nod to the tricky camera work. And I think they do a good job of that in this movie. One of the things that they use, and I'd have to sit down and write down how many times they did it and if they did it like exactly the same every time. But there's a really creepy way to shoot a scene that I always remember it first from The Exorcist. And just go with me on this. What it is it's like a slow advancing forward of the camera, whether it's tracking or zooming, and whatever the subject is in the frame is doing something really rapid and unsettling, and they're just sort of moving in on that. Like for instance, in The Exorcist, when Linda Blair is wagging her tongue really fast, and it's like cold in the room, and you see her breath in the air, and she just looks like so freaky and spazzy with that tongue going nuts. And they do that in this movie too, with like these kind of zoom ins where people are moving in like really jerky, frenetic sort of movements, and there's this beautiful sound work with like bone cracking sounds while people are moving in their jerky ways. So I do think that they did a nice job of not trying to be like overly Raimi style with like silly, crazy, fast zoom ins and all that stuff, but there are elements of that,
right,
which I really liked.
Yeah, I agree there, but. And maybe this comes down to, because I'm not someone who's particularly against remakes or reboots or whatever they're called. But I think there are times they work. 21 Jump Street, that movie, amazing. Yeah. Amazing. Because they had a different take that was still within the realm of what 21 Jump Street is. And maybe that was just this, like, there was no need. I don't think this needed to be done. It's probably scratched a lot of people's itches who wanted a new Evil Dead, and they didn't have any ideas. So a remake is the easiest thing to do. But yeah, it just missed, because so many things came out of Evil Dead. You have a director who started his career there, right? An iconic performance from Bruce Campbell. A lot of techniques that came out of that people started copying. No one watched this movie and took anything away from it. It was like, that's what sets this apart, right? Like, there's just nothing unique in this, I guess. And that really bothered me. Like, why even do it then if you're not going to do something unique? Even the female Ghostbusters, as dumb as that is to say, as the unique thing is they're all women, at least there was that. It was still a bad movie, but like they at least tried a different approach, I guess. Like if they just remade Ghostbusters, but then took all the humor out of it, no one would like that Ghostbusters.
Well, I think that I see what you're saying, and I think a lot of that could affect not just you, but I think a lot of people, especially people that were like, you love comedies. You've always loved comedies, and that's fantastic, and so do I. So if you're somebody that really loves, and I'm not saying that that's the only kind of movies that you like, but I know that you really do love a good comedy, or just funny bits. So for this movie to be completely devoid of that, I agree with you. I think that they could have sprinkled a little something in there. I think that the character of Eric, who you already hated because he looked like Jared Leto, but I think maybe like he could have been easily made into a sort of, comedic role that wouldn't have distracted from anything. There needed to be some of that. I'm with you. There needed to be that.
Well, and I can't even say the original Evil Deads are supposed to be funny. You know what I'm saying? Like,
the first one is not as much. The first one is really more just maddening.
Yes. But the second one is kind of cartoony, I guess, is more what I should say. Not really funny. It comes across funny because it's over exaggerated, and Bruce
Yeah.
Campbell's face in that is, but that's what makes it engaging and makes you enjoy it, right? Like,
Right.
and this was just missing from that. And there was another thing I was going to say on top of that, but I forgot what it is. It's not important.
Well, but I will give you this though. I think that whereas I think I can save this for somebody that might still want to like this movie. It's if you are now you like comedy. I like that tension. I like the action tension. Like whereas you really like psychological horror, that stuff usually is so unsettling to me that it kind of takes the enjoyment out of it a little bit for me.
Okay.
So I mean, I enjoy a good one and I can appreciate a good psychological horror, but it kind of freaks me out. Just the concept of mental illness and people losing their mind and stuff like that is just, it's just like a fear of mine. So that it's unsettling, but for me, I really like hardcore action pacing, gnarly kills, stuff like that. It's kind of like this movie is sort of like if you like guitar solos, like it's like one long guitar solo instead of like the song kind of going through different movements and feels and vibes. It's just like a fucking nonstop, just finger tapping guitar solo all the way to the end.
Yeah, and I can't say if I knew nothing of the other Evil Dead iterations, I might have enjoyed this movie a lot more. But I think it's just because it has the name on it. I think there's something that comes with that. It's like, here's a Transformers movie, but they're just robots. They never turn into cars.
Right. They're just formers. Formers, exactly what meets the eye.
Yeah, see, that's a terrible movie.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because that could just be a car lot. Like it's just like 2 hours of a camera just on a car lot. No movement. Just like
they don't do much.
You hear like a car or truck going past, like in the background or whatever, you know, like a bird comes and lands and flies away. But here though, let me ask you about this though, because I think this is something that is kind of interesting that they did. They sort of, whereas this movie doesn't have an Ash, I like the fact that they switched up final people. I can't really say final girl, but final people on us because first of all, let me just not to go off on another tangent. One thing that I really like about this movie, I love brother and sister stuff. You know, there's so much romantic couple stuff in any genre of movie, let alone horror, that I always really love a good brother and sister thing. Part of it's probably because I have a sister who I love dearly, that I connect to that. But like Jeepers Creepers, the brother sister relationship there, I really enjoyed. And I really like the choice here instead of versus a romantic couple. So let me just say that real quick. But what I also really like is that we go from did they pronounce it Maya or Mia in the movie? Mia. Okay. So they go from Mia being pretty much helpless. Like we think that she's going to be our final girl. Like we just assume that. But then she gets possessed and David is the one really trying to fix the situation. And then things don't go very well for David. And then we get a return of her. And not usually do you get somebody who is that heavily compromised to come back, and we get actually two alternating final people.
Yes.
So that was kind of different.
It was. And I found that jarring because I'll say this. Here's another thing I didn't like about it. And I can't remember how much it's used. I know it has to have been used in the original ones. But when someone drops someone's possessed, but then they'll be like, wait a minute, what's happening? Like, I'm okay. Oh my God, please help me in a way for the demon to trick the person to get them closer or release them or whatever. I'm sure that happened at least once in Evil Dead 2, right? I can't be crazy.
Yeah.
It happens so frequently in this movie that it became hard to tell when someone was doing that as a facade, to where there are moments where I'm like, oh, they're doing the facade thing again. Then it's like, nope, they weren't. And now they're dead.
Right.
And I'm just like, well, wait, how did they get the demon out originally? Then there's the whole thing at the end.
I know what you're going to say.
Because, all right, let's walk through the very end here. Because they see in the book the only way to stop it is, I guess you get to pick one of three. It's burn them, dismember them, or bury them alive.
Mm-hmm.
Two of those pretty obviously you aren't coming back from.
Right.
Thankfully, David picks option 3, bury alive, which you apparently can come back from. Because so not only does he bury Mia alive, he puts a plastic bag over her head to also suffocate her. It looks cool, right? I'm still on board, all on board. He then the tree that was on fire extinguishes himself, which to a demon expert like David is like, this means she's fine now. So he digs her back up, then proceeds to, because they talk about earlier how she had OD'd and the defibrillator, like she had died. And the defibrillator is the only thing that brought her back to life. So he fashions because he's also an engineer, his own defibrillator, which I did have to look this up because I'm super jaded and cynical at this point. Like the meter he's using has like an ohms gauge on it. So I was like, how many ohms can the human body take? And it's like max 300. And it's at 500 where he has like no charge, where he's like, oh shit, this isn't working anymore. And ohms are one of those things where it's like the smaller the number gets, it compounds how severe it is. So like the human body can take like 100,000 to 500 ohms. And then once you get to like 300 ohms, you're effed.
Right.
He was like plugging this thing up to 20 ohms. And that was my science corner of that's not going to work. But then he's like, well, shit, it didn't work. And he walks away and you hear her go, David. And he turns around and now she is like standing up. This has been over 15 to 20 seconds and she's standing up and I'm like, here we go again. This is certainly no human after being buried alive and then shocked 80 times pops up like that. But no, she was fine. I'm like, wait, that worked? Also to get her in the hole, he subdues her. But one of the other dude, the Jared Leto, is like, dude, you can't drug her like she's possessed. But then it works. I'm like, wait, he could drug her? What the fuck?
Well, she was kind of knocked out first,
kind of,
and
yes,
then
okay.
yeah. But no, I'll go with you on that. It's a little confusing, that whole section. I will say a few things about it though.
But she just bounces back too fast and too hard
and too clean. Yeah,
and way too clean.
Also, interesting that it's the second Mia that we've seen revived with a syringe to the chest in film. But so
are you talking about Mrs. Mia Wallace?
Yes, of course. So there are a couple things in that scene, and I'm with you on the things that you take issue with. I do actually really like some of the stuff where, and I'm going to remind you real quick, you're absolutely right. It is a little weird sometimes when they are possessed and they go back to being perfectly human. One part where you might remember that in Evil Dead 2 is when his girlfriend is in the vice, when her head is in the vice.
Yes.
And she comes back and her face is perfect.
Yes.
So yeah, it is. This franchise has a weird way of just asking us to go with it.
And I think that works way more because you're like, it's a severed head. Like,
yeah, right.
There's no ambiguity about what's happening right now.
Right. So I will say though, you probably don't remember it, but there's some really great layered string music happening in the defibrillator scene.
Yeah.
Like when he's about to, it's really nice, like little gripping moment there and really nice use of music. And it's kind of almost minimalist, but these layered strings, really pretty. And I will go with you definitely, because the one thing that it didn't completely take me out of the movie, but I thought it was an interesting choice to have the final quote unquote abomination that rises from the ground take the form of Mia. Like
Sure.
that was a little confusing. Like the fact
I also was not sure. I'm like, is that the same person? Is it supposed to be the same person?
I did a little reading on that. And I think what we are supposed to believe is that The Mia that is human, that is fine, that is the Mia that we know, is the one in the red dress. The Mia that comes out of the ground that looks like the possessed Mia is basically just the evil spirit that they talk about in the book, but he's just chosen to take the form of Mia.
Yeah.
So
but also, they're very specific about it has to claim 5 souls, but then it's like, well, I guess 4 is good enough.
No, you're right.
We almost had the 5th one, but buried alive.
Well, I guess if you consider like the fact that it did claim her soul, but then David brought her back. Or if we want to consider David being claimed, like he just gets burned.
4. Yeah, but he's only 4. There's only 5 people. They all needed to die.
So, but didn't they all die though?
No, because Mia's alive.
But she died for a second though.
Well, I don't know. Does she not have no soul then? I mean, I guess so.
She died for a second and then he brought her back to life. Like his whole plan. Yeah.
To me, she's alive there. If they have to indicate that she is alive with no soul and that it was claimed.
Oh,
if you're going to have rules for your demons, follow the rules for your demons.
Speaking of demon, David, Eric, Mia, Olivia, Natalie. Like that's kind of fun.
That's
like
fun.
It spells demon.
Yes.
But yeah, I did like that. I like it when a movie.
Yeah, Olivia. We haven't even talked about Olivia.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know. It goes back to what you were saying about some of the characters not being really firmly established.
Yeah.
And
I sent you a message a half hour into this movie. I'm like, I think this is the first time the blonde has talked, and I'm sure it wasn't, but it stuck out to me. I was like, oh,
yeah, it felt that way. Yeah. It's a little neglecty, although I will say that the movie does do a good job of.
Who's the blonde? I shouldn't just keep calling her the blonde.
Yeah, but sometimes in movies we talk about a lot where they'll just kind of forget about a character for a while. The one thing that I like is when for the time period that Mia is down in the basement and other people are getting possessed up on the main floor, they do a good job of still cutting back to her in the basement, whether she's just giggling or something. So they do a nice balance.
Possessed
back and
Mia
forth.
Was awesome. I loved Possessed Mia.
When she cuts her tongue in half on that X-Acto knife, that's so fucking badass. And I love that stuff. That actress, that Jane Levy or however you say it, she does possession wonderfully. Like she looks like terrifying. She looks terrified herself. She just really nails but putting across that facade of being in an altered state. I mean, she's awesome at that.
Yeah.
So that was really cool. And I do really love the fact that, this movie has enough action to equate like 3 different climaxes. But when we do get the final climax where it's raining blood and the cabin is on fire and she's jamming the abomination version of herself in the face with the chainsaw, and she's kind of got like kind of like how Henry Rollins has this really specific stance that he uses when he sings, where it's kind of like he's getting almost like ready to fight, like his legs are kind of spread apart.
Yeah.
She's got this kind of like nice, steady, like she's really digging into it. Like she's got a stance, she's driving that chainsaw in. And it's a great tableau. So I feel like a really strong finish there. I don't know. I love this movie because it's just got a lot of, it just rocks. Like it just fucking, it gives you what you want from a high energy, high action horror film, if that's what you're looking for.
Now, you also told me before we started, that the only CGI in this movie is to hide practical. Yes. I do not buy that. There's no way.
Yeah. I'm
going to say yes. Is there a lot of practical effects? Yes.
If you look at the credits, you've never seen, first of all, there's no credits. If they did do any CGI, they didn't give them any credits. There's no credits, and there's 800,000 credits for prosthetics. I mean, 1 million of them. Sure. And I really think that they went the extra mile to do.
I think the makeup and things are real on people, but there are events that happen in this movie. There's just no way. No way.
I don't know. I don't know.
And the number one offender, and there's some issue on it. This is real or not. And so, okay. At the very, very end of this movie, We get the most unnecessary, most like dumb referential post-credit scene ever. And you just see Bruce Campbell. He's like mostly silhouetted, it's just this mostly shadowed. We get a little bit of his face. It just kind of pops up and he goes, groovy. And that's it. Why the fuck that's in there? I mean, I know why it's in there. I don't know why it's in there.
I think that it's such a bold choice, like I mentioned earlier, to not have Ash in the movie. And I think it's the right choice. But I think that maybe the filmmakers were just terrified of if there's just not even a glimpse of the guy, that fans are going to feel like ripped off somehow. It's like going to see Zeppelin and they don't play Stairway or something like that. Like, you just had to give him just a little something. But he does have, there are a couple cameos though, I will say.
Well, hold on. I also have to say, not only is that unnecessary, I know you say there's no CGI, that face is CGI. I have watched that scene I don't know how many times. I've seen a lot of CGI. The way the mouth moves and the way his face moves when he turns, it's not a quick human jerk. There is this weird CGI where the face will like go forward and sweep a little bit. And that is what it does. That face is CGI. You say they filmed it. They might have, but they filmed it for a reference. And that is a CGI face.
I'm going to have to go back and watch that.
Internet, prove me wrong.
No, that's interesting. That's it. And you know what? I'll tell you, for as much as we're saying that it might just have been a last minute decision just to like make sure that they give some Bruce Campbell to the audience, that would be a situation where you're probably in post-production and you're like, we gotta give him something. Let's create it, Yeah. So I wouldn't. I mean,
I would have been totally on board if you have a post-credit scene where he hears about what happened and is like, shit, or whatever. And is like, now I have to get involved. Fine.
Right.
If you're using him to set up a sequel to this, as much as I don't like it, I like it way more than whatever this was.
Right.
This just blatant reference.
Yeah, it is a little weird. I mean, at that point, I don't think we need it. I think maybe they should have had just a little bit more faith in themselves. Maybe it's just the idea of saying, like, we have a rule and goddamn Bruce Campbell's face has got to be in every single Evil Dead.
I would understand that then.
Just like some sort of trademark stamp.
But then you find a better way to put him in.
Right. Well, that's fair. That's totally fair.
Because
I would have to go back and watch
I would not be like, what the fuck is Bruce Campbell doing in this? Like, I would, if anything, I'm expecting him to show up.
Well, speaking of effects, here's a fun fact for you. Picture in your mind let's say a big empty warehouse, like with a big concrete floor. There's nothing in it. Picture a big empty warehouse, and then picture one like a milk gallon, like a milk jug, 1 gallon of, let's just say, picture apple cider. So there's that sitting on the floor. Now picture not 700, not 7,000. 70,000 of those gallons. That's how much fake blood they used in this movie. 70,000 gallons.
I believe that. There's a lot of blood in this movie.
The first movie used, I think they said they thought maybe 200 to 500 gallons.
Oh, man.
And this movie used 70,000. And somebody out there is listening. They're like, there's no fucking way.
It explains how no one bled out in this movie. Because, man, people have just severed limbs and keep on chugging.
Right. But I've seen like a behind the scenes picture, and it's literally a dude. It's in that final scene, and he's holding off camera a fire hose. Like, I mean, it's a fucking fire hose just blasting blood.
Oh, for the rain?
Constantly. Yeah, for the rain.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so yeah, it's a very wet movie, very, very bloody. So I love that about it. Yeah, I know how you feel, but you know what? I respect the problems that you have with this movie. I mean, I really do. I think you make some great points. I am all
I don't want to sound too negative about it.
Yeah.
Because I can appreciate a lot of what they're doing. It just didn't hit well with me. And it might be a personal thing.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that if people just like, if you like a straight ahead action, like, because I'm going to make my point clearly. There are some people out there that literally, not unlike you and I, they legitimately have a hard time watching movies. Like their attention span, it's hard for you and I to wrap our minds around that. But there's some people that just can't get into a movie because it's just they're too distracted. This movie is a good movie to watch if you're somebody like that, because it's just a lot of action. Once you get past, like I said, first 15 minutes, it's going to be go, go, go all the way to the end. So it's got a great pace. It's a fun watch. It's gnarly. It's hardcore. So I love it for that.
Yeah. Okay.
But I do.
Hey, you know what? It's okay to not like a movie, all right? And it's okay to like a movie. I don't hate anyone for liking this movie. I totally get it, and it's fine.
I'm actually bothered by the fact of how right you are that they still could have put one element of comedy in this. Now, I didn't think about that the whole time, but now that you say that, it's like, damn, why didn't they just sprinkle one character with a little bit of humor? That you're 100% right about that. So I'm with you.
Oh, well, they can't all be, 100%. It's fine. So, okay, well, that's all. We got to wrap this one up. All right. So that was Evil Dead from 2013. Tim, next up, it's listener request time.
Woo!
This is an interesting one. This film is from 1980. It's called He Knows You're Alone, and it's the silver screen debut of a little actor known as Tom Hanks, America's favorite COVID recipient.
I've heard of him. Yeah. He's been in some things.
So that should be fun. I think that's just it's like a Halloween knockoff, essentially. It's fun. But we'll get into that next week. Please follow us on Instagram at Slumber Podcast Massacre. Our email is slumberpodcast@gmail.com. Our Patreon is /Slumber Podcast Massacre. A huge thanks to all our patrons for everything you do for us. You help make this show possible. Timmy, do you got anything else to say about Evil Dead? Because I don't.
I'm just going to give you, I'm just going to say, that's my CGI Bruce Campbell.
Look it up. I'm looking it up again when we get done with this. All right, Tim. Well, we'll see you next time, buddy.
Sounds great. I'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye-bye.